Welcome to Spirit Behind the Screen. Each episode, your host, Marti McCurdy, deep dives on industry trends around high-reliability electronics and the supply chain in aerospace and defense. This is episode 62 with Jim Cantrell, co-founder and CEO of Phantom Space.
Hi, I'm Marti McCurdy with Spirit Electronics, and today our podcast Behind the Screen has a very special guest, Mr. Jim Cantrell. And Jim is joining us from Phantom Space, but we really want to hear all about the legacy that brought you to Phantom Space, because I understand that you have some pretty wild, adventurous hobbies, but also your track record in space has been pretty spectacular. So welcome, Jim, to the show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Well, I know you're a fellow San Jose. I didn't grow up there, but I certainly lived there for 14, 15 years. So you were born and raised in the Bay Area. That kind of explains the start.
Actually, it was Southern California, but I went to high school in the Bay Area. So yeah, I was exposed to it when it was really silicon and instead of software silicon.
Yes, I do remember back in the day, we knew everybody and everybody was in hardware.
That's right. Yeah. It was a different era for sure.
It was. I remember seeing somebody's Mercedes that used to go back and forth, I think, to the AMD building, and his license plate said silicon to gold, whatever the two elements were. It was like, SI to AU or whatever.
AU.
Yeah. And I thought, that's a pretty good one. So
that's
that
a
was
good
always
one.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Jim, tell us a little bit about your journey here, because you've worked at some of the most prestigious space companies around, and then, like all great entrepreneurs and minds, you basically now are doing your own thing at Phantom and making some big inroads there. So give us a little rundown of the history of how you got there.
Well, so first of all, I think of myself as a builder and doer. I mean, I'm happiest when I'm just building things. It doesn't matter if it's a house, a car, or a company. So, I mean, that's really been the passion that I followed most of my life. And I have a disdain for conformity and rules. So that naturally led me to where I went. But my first job was with JPL down in Pasadena and working on a Mars balloon program. This was in the 80s, mid 80s. And then we started dealing sort of outside of work with the Soviet space scientists and French space scientists through the Planetary Society. And that led to some cooperation that was outside the government, because if you remember, the Soviet Union was verboten, kind of like Russia is today, but there was a period after that where they weren't so verboten. But I ended up going to France, to the French Space Agency, in 1989, worked there on the actual Mars balloon project that we're going to fly on a Soviet mission to Mars. And so I learned French, I learned Russian. And the one thing I learned in life is if you don't want to go to these places, don't learn the language, right? And I didn't know any French when I got there, nor Russian, but I certainly learned it. And that, had a big effect on my career in the future. So when I came back after the Soviet Union failed, we didn't quite get the mission done before the Soviet Union fell apart. I ended up coming back to the U.S. and nobody would hire me because I was considered a traitor because I worked with the Soviets. Maybe the French were worse, I don't know. So I ended up going back to Utah State University, where I got my degree, and my major professor was now head of the space lab there. And within about a month, I got recruited by Defense Intelligence Agency and later through Missile Defense Agency to go back to Russia and helped what they called brain drain, stop it. I think of Colonel Jessup in A Few Good Men. Talks about, the Cubans, eating breakfast 30 feet from him, want to kill him. I mean, that's how it was there, because we had North Koreans and Iranian Revolutionary Guard and all these people trying to buy the Russian scientists for nuclear weapons, for ICBMs and things like that. So I worked for about 6 years. We helped them rebuild their early warning satellite system. They were a nuclear armed enemy that was blind, so it was in our interest to do that. We did joint missile defense experiments. And basically tried to keep these guys busy. So I did get arrested in 1995 for espionage by the Russians, and that was a whole kerfuffle. Ended up, Al Gore broke me loose from that, and probably the only thing I can thank Al Gore for in my life, but it's just fine. I am not unappreciative. After that, I ended up doing a lot of military space back at the lab in Utah. But this call came to my front door in 2001, and partly because of what I did in Russia. I helped convert some ICBMs to satellite launchers over there to get them off the market. And for a while, I mean, people don't realize it, but the Russians were really the lead in the commercial launch market, especially for these small satellites. And that really gave, this what we see today with this massive amount of small satellites launched. That gave birth to that in a lot of ways. And SpaceX picked up that mantle and went on. I also got involved again with the Planetary Society to do privately funded solar sail missions. So we flew Cosmos 1 out of a converted ICBM for a submarine and went up into Murmansk and launched it out of there. So that was very interesting. So Elon Musk calls me out of the blue. I thought his name was Ian Musk, and I had never heard of PayPal. I didn't know of any of this stuff. I was a very early adopter of the internet, but for some reason PayPal escaped me, I guess. And when he called, I had no idea who he was. It was a Palo Alto area code. So I'm thinking, might be somebody I know, might be somebody from high school, right? And he was very polite, but he started in on this story about how he wants to make humanity multiplanetary and get humanity off its addiction to fossil fuel and protect free speech from tyrants. And so now you kind of see this blueprint for where Elon has gone in his life, right? He told us right up front what he wanted to do. And so he wanted to launch a mission to Mars, and it was going to originally have mice that would go to Mars. And there was a lot of naivete associated with Elon's thinking at the time. So I put together a team of people from my Mars days that could help design this mission and could size the rocket, and we could go to the Russians and buy the rocket. And that's why he called me, was he knew I had this connection. And Bob Zubrin, who's now fairly well known in the Mars community for the Mars Society and the conference they have and the various books he's written, he had connected us. And so we met in Salt Lake City behind security, because I didn't know this guy. I thought he might be packing a gun, so I made him meet me behind security. I couldn't figure out who Elon Musk was, and I finally figured out it was Elon Musk. And oh yeah, so he'd done all these other things, and so gradually, took him more and more seriously. But if you go back to that day in 2001, this was July, the world was a different place. It was pre 9/11. We were supposedly living off this peace dividend. Cold War was over. Really didn't know what to do with all this extra time and energy. This sort of thinking really wasn't so sinful as it would be today. There was a lot of guys who came to us. The Gross brothers came to me at one point and said, "Hey, would you take me to Moscow to show me? We might want to do space stuff over there." So, they're billionaires. So I'm taking all these billionaires to Moscow. So this was not out of the ordinary, right? But the idea that this would ever succeed was out of the ordinary. And I have to tell you that if you go back to that time, it was literal insanity to say you're going to build your own launch vehicle. That didn't come till later, after we tried to do the deal with the Russians, and they told us to go away. And Elon says, "Fine, we'll do it ourselves." So this team of people I put together became early SpaceX. And so I stayed for another year after that, roughly. We put together the company. I left early. I didn't see the space shuttle retiring, and I still don't think they would have survived had the NASA not retired the shuttle and put that money back into what became COTS and the Falcon 9 and Dragon. At any rate, it was one of those moments that changes your life forever. And I didn't realize at the time, and it probably took me another 10 years before I realized how important he was and how that moment was in history, and that here I was as an observer of it. I like to call myself the Forrest Gump of space, because I was just at the right place at the right time. So after that, I started a company called Strat Space, and we did a lot of work with bigger companies. So I sort of a fractional entrepreneur is the way I would term Strat Space. I ended up working for almost every large company in the aerospace industry, helping them win new business. And then I worked with small companies so that they could grow to become acquired by the big companies. So it was like this ecosystem that I'd helped create. I helped start a lot of these commercial companies along the way. Skybox Imaging was involved in that. We eventually sold that to Google for $500 million. Between that and SpaceX, it really set off this latest wave of investment, which is still arguably ongoing and growing. Others like York Space helped them get started. ICEYE, in fact, I helped design their first satellite. My team from Strat Space, Planet IQ. There's a number of them I helped start. What I started to see was the U.S. government was doing very little, and the private sector with this kind of capital access was doing a lot. So that's when I swore off government and went towards purely commercial activities. So one of the things I saw, particularly with Skybox, we tried to do launch deals with the Russians and got screwed. We tried to do a deal with the Falcon 1, got screwed on that because they decided not to continue with the Falcon 1 after they got it to work. Those launch was one of these things that would take these new space companies down. So I set about the idea of, what the world needs is a smaller launch vehicle that, like a taxi, can take you where you want, when you want, instead of a bus or a train or that sort of thing. That's really the model for this bigger ride share is like big airplanes, big trains, and it's more efficient on a per passenger basis, but people are willing to pay for, time is really, really expensive anyhow. They're willing to pay for that. I started a company called Vector, and we raised $100 million on that to build both satellites and launch vehicles. That ended up going belly up because of the founders that I chose. We ended up fighting, and they pushed me out. And within 3 months of pushing me out, they bankrupted. So by the time they had bankrupted, I had already started Phantom Space, which I'm currently the CEO of. And we've been at that for 5 years, and we've raised about $40 million. We're in the process of finishing our Series B, which will be another 30 or so. That'll be enough money to get us to orbit, which compares roughly with what SpaceX spent on Falcon 1. Right, so we're just very frugal. We're very focused on profit. We've already had a satellite contract that we've delivered on. We have several other satellite contracts. We have about $80 million in backlog on launch. NASA's one of our customers. So things are going pretty well. We just tend to be very quiet. We're quiet because no good comes from saying you're going to do things. Good comes from doing those things. And we just don't want to be the people that are out there making a lot of noise and doing nothing.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I have so many comments. What a great intro, Jim. First and foremost, conforming to the rules. My parents aren't with us anymore, but if they were, they'd say I own a business because I have a problem with authority, right? So I think you must fall in that category, right? But exactly. The Russians, I mean, that's a whole new category, right? So I was on a GPAC panel the other day with a couple of the major primes. One obviously is, the company that needs to go get our 2 stranded people. And so they're all bantering around about it. And I just looked at them. And of course, there was like 250 people there. And there was 4 of us panelists and the CEO of GPAC. And I go, well, why don't you just call the Russians to go get them? Like, I'm pretty sure they can go get them, right? So
yeah, they probably charge you 3 times the price. Yeah.
Save the people, though. I mean, I think, I would like to think that these kinds of environments transcend the proxy wars that are happening, right? So,
eventually they do. It's all about money.
It
money
is about
control.
money. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Russia's an interesting. I'll just give you a short little story. Back, in the day I went over when it was supposedly, no longer communist. This was probably mid to late 90s. And of course, there's still a lot of, conversations and propaganda going on there. But I've been over because I wanted some aerobatic airplanes and things, and I, sure enough, I look back on it. I'll tell you the story quickly, but I look back on it and that's absolutely top of my list of the stupidest things I've ever done in my life. Went over there, met the kid that was the waiter at the hotel, spoke English, fluent Farsi from his mother and fluent Russian from his father. And he lived in Moscow and he's in law school. And I thought, okay, this kid's going to ask me to come back to the States. And honestly, I would have done it. He was just so interesting. So long story short, I said, this is what I'd like to do. I want some night vision. I want to see these L-39s, all these things. And so he comes back the next day and he goes, yeah, I got it. Let's go on the subway. So him and I go on the subway to this place. You walk into this warehouse and like there's armed guards everywhere and they lock the door behind you. I'm like, no one knows where I'm at. Right. So we go up there. It's like a jewelry store, right? Like you can buy anything.
Anything you want.
Anything you want. So anyway, long story short,
those rooms. Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about.
Yes, so I do.
I did buy a few things and I live to tell the story. That's all that I'm going to say about that.
Well, the biggest problem was getting them out of the country. That's what I found.
Well, interesting enough. This obvious, as you say, was like, pre 9/11, all these things. I put that stuff in a duffel bag and checked it into Lufthansa and off I came and landed in DC and they didn't even confiscate it.
Amazing. Amazing. Yeah.
I know,
I
right?
bought
I hear you.
icons that got confiscated and some space equipment, space helmets from the cosmonauts, and that ended up not making it, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, congrats also on the language. I mean, that's I think the Russian language is super difficult, and to master that, then you really are, embedded in the culture in the country. So that's pretty fabulous.
Well, I'll tell you, I don't think I ever totally mastered. I know I didn't master it, but I was functional, right? And I could understand it well. It was hard for me to pull up a lot of the words, but I could certainly get around. And the technical Russian I know very well, but I won't say it's a complex language because it's very phonetic. In other words, it's spoken exactly as it's written. I find French far more difficult. Even today,
Mhm.
like when I'm freshening up on French and Russian, I get the French grammar all wrong. I score horribly, but I'm actually almost native in French, as far as like speaking goes. But,
Uh,
it's such a difficult language grammatically.
let's talk a little bit about your journey. So first and foremost, it's so impressive what you've done over the years, and also how the connectivity goes that you're in. Just let's talk a little bit like outside the box of imagination, right? Like, what do you think is our big limit on getting people to Mars, getting better transportation out there? Like, what is the big limitation, just, in the grand scheme of things, other than
Yeah, I think
money?
there's three things. It's a good question. There's three things in sort of three different categories. I'd say the first one is just imagination and willingness to do it. That's one thing you got to give Elon credit for. And I've been criticized for saying this, but I'll say it again, is the man just does not have any fear
Mhm.
whatsoever. He just
Great.
doesn't. And that's rare in a human being. And I consider myself fairly fearless, but I stand in awe of this guy. He's he's way out there. So he definitely has the imagination. He was thinking about this from day one at SpaceX. So the second is money, right? And so part of that is related to the first issue. If you don't have the imagination, the willpower, then you tend to find excuses that, oh, it's too expensive. You don't say, damn it, there's got to be a better way to do this and cheaper, and we can do it. And that's what you're seeing Elon do. I mean,
Mhm.
he's just going head to head with the FAA right now, and I think that's a political hit on him. But whatever, he's still taking it on. So it requires that. And then lastly, it's the size of the rocket. That's why you see this big gigantic starship. And I read something on Twitter that he wrote, and he had some picture that I couldn't make sense of, where he's talking about like a super starship. Just so everybody understands, the starship is so big, no human has ever built a rocket that big before. It's never existed. Nothing the Russians did, which was enormous, right? The Energia was absolutely enormous. The space shuttle was enormous. The Saturn V is enormous. Nobody's built one this big. So it is, in my mind, clearly a interplanetary transport system. And he's thinking even bigger, right? So,
Mhm.
that was Bob Zubrin's message to him is, look, we got to go there intelligently. We have to pre-position resources. We have to have a transportation system that doesn't require 90 flights to assemble some stupid thing in orbit that becomes expensive and unreliable. You just test it all on the ground, throw it in a big shroud, and then just fly it to Mars. And so Elon's got the right idea.
Yeah, yeah. I totally, admire everything you just said about him. The no fear for sure is there, but there's always people in history that are, visionaries,
Hmm.
and sometimes they come off as mentally unstable, and other times they have an invention like,
Because we all are.
Yes, exactly. But I think the difference with Elon Musk is that he actually has these imaginary and visionary ideas, but then he also pulls them off, right?
He
Like you
does.
gotta you
Yeah,
gotta give him credit. I mean, I was an
absolutely.
early adopter in Tesla. It was a love affair every day. I owned a car for 10 years, and I'll probably never not drive electric. Some of the other electric car companies, right? I said, look, you didn't even have to invent the wheel. All you had to do was get the open source
Yeah,
from Tesla and just improve on it, right? Like make your own spin on it or
right,
whatever. And they still
right.
can't do it. So the guy definitely delivers, but I appreciate though that the limitation is like the size of the rocket, like that. But somebody will, whether hopefully Jim, it's you or somebody else, will conquer this feat. And then, like every great thing, as soon as somebody does it, then everybody follows and can figure it out from there, right? So hopefully in our lifetime that happens.
I'm not going to Mars, but I do want to launch lots of rockets here and lots of satellites and make a lot of money and help protect this nation.
Yeah, I think you and I have a wild streak. I know you race and I do too. So I think that given the chance, I probably most definitely will go, if there's an option to go to the moon, I'm happy to go. I'm happy to take an orbit around and things, but I'm probably not going to Mars either.
Yeah. I did, when I was a kid, I wanted to be an astronaut in the worst way. And I used to have dreams about floating in space. Now I don't even care to. And Charlie Duke, who was, Apollo 16 astronaut, has become a very good friend of mine. And we spent a lot of time talking about what it was like, to go. And that was a pretty primitive circumstance that they went. I mean, I don't know if you know, but the lunar module pilots were standing as they landed. They had no seats. They were just standing there in their spacesuits, and they slept on hammocks. It's just, you get this sense that it was a huge adventure, true, but not necessarily the most pleasant thing in the world. So I don't know. As I've gotten older, I still have a lot of ambition, and I'll jump into a race car and hurt myself for 2 hours for a stint, and so that's my kind of pain and suffering, I guess.
Yes, give me, maybe my big wish list is give me F-35 at 1.6 Mach at
There you
200 feet above, terrain falling. I'll do that.
I'll do that any day of the week.
Any day of the week. Yeah, me too. I just did a luncheon with a couple of the F-35 pilots, and they were fabulous, and I was so excited about speaking with them and talking in front of this audience. And there was a full bird colonel there, and I accidentally called him a major. And I'm just like, well,
Oops.
I'm never going to ride in his aircraft, right?
Right. Yeah.
So
yeah, there's like a piece of your brain missing to want to do that sort of stuff. And no offense. In fact, all the admiration in the world for fighter pilots. I wanted to be one, but I'm too big. But you got to be missing that fear gene to a certain degree, and part of your brain that reacts to fear is just gone.
Well, I mean, I take my motorcycle to the track in a car, and you do the same. So, I mean, that's what people say about us on a regular level. I just think they, like a Formula One racer, they started early, right? So,
That's right. No, that's exactly right. And
yeah.
they're the video game generation, right?
Yes.
Yeah, those things have become video games.
When stuff's flying past their head at 1.6 Mach, they built up that resistance to deal with, the fear. So
yeah. When you're young, you're not going to die, right? As you get older, you realize your mortality to a much stronger degree.
Yes, and when you're young, you think 40 is old, so.
Right. Yeah, 35 was, I couldn't imagine. I remember I was born in 1965, and I thought, I'm going to be 35 years old in the year 2000. That's old. I bet I'm going to have to wear a tie every day. It was like the last thing I did.
Well, thank God the world evolved the way we like it.
Right? It's true.
Well, what do you think your timing is currently with Phantom? When's your next round of funding? What are the listeners? How can they help you out?
Yeah, so help us out by sending money if you're a qualified investor. But we've been in the market for a Series B for quite some time, and the market's been very challenging. That's probably a polite way to put it. It's cyclical. I saw it coming in 2019 when we started the company, and I said to my co-founder Mike D'Angelo, I said we've got to be cap light on this, which means we don't build our own engines. We don't have a staff, and we have sort of a SEAL team sort of mentality about how we hire people. And I've had a lot of friends who are SEAL team members for whatever reason in my life. And, I've learned from them that, you pick loyalty and reliability over capability. Somebody that's highly capable and not reliable or loyal, you just don't want them around. So that's how we put it together. We're only like 25 people, and we've only spent $39 million so far, and we're about 18 months away from our first launch. Built and delivered a satellite. We've got the whole constellation underway. We're building satellite components, and so we're probably 18 months from when we close our financing. When is that going to happen? I don't know. I mean, if I had a Ouija board, I might be able to tell you a little bit more, but it always seems imminent. We've got a whole bunch of people that want to lead the round, and this market's just very odd. So I'm loath to predict a time frame, but my gut sense is probably early next year we'll have it closed out and be back to full bore. We're probably half bore right now because we're just trying to make sure we can survive. And just a little plug for my my extremely cheap mentality that's allowed us to succeed. You know, you look at how many other rocket companies have died. You know, start off with Virgin Orbit, then you had Firefly made it. ABL just laid off a bunch of people. Astra didn't make it. You know, I'm hearing other things about some of the other competitors. You know, Rocket Lab made it. So if we come out of this on the other side of it, we'll be one of the few remaining in the business. A lot of these smaller companies aren't making it. There's a few that have some pretty unique approaches that'll probably make it. But, you know, literally there's room for 5 or 6 of these companies. I'm not too worried about it. Our business model is we happen to be a satellite manufacturing company that happens to make a launch vehicle because we see that as an ecosystem. You know, I think that'll carry us through. And our ultimate, you know, goal is to put up Phantom Cloud, which is, think of it as AI edge computing in space, that it's a network that'll be available to satellites to send their data back, and then software people that know how to create value out of data flows can put their software payloads on our network. And so kind of a Google big data play. And that's, we think that's the killer app for what we're doing. And it's something I've been thinking about for 20 years. And, you know, so I'm just not giving up. I'm just too stubborn to give up, I guess. It's like being a racer, right? If you spin in the corner, you know, Vector was a spin off and banged up the fender. And so I got back in the race and here I am.
Yep, I totally agree with you there, everybody. When I bought Spirit, actually, we just celebrated Monday our 7-year anniversary, and you never know how upside down companies are till you're in it, right? It always looks rosy, you know, that dating period, but the, you know, divorce is imminent, right? So we just celebrated 7 years, and looking back, people are like, thanks so much. They're like, well, you know, it was in rough shape, Marty. Like, what was plan B? I'm like, making plan A work, because that's it, right? Yeah. I'm all in. So I get it that you're stubborn enough to hang in there. I think you're going to be successful. But I do. Yeah, I think it's great, though, that the conversation about data and getting data down here, we were just having this conversation at the office yesterday with a company about, you know, the massive amounts of data that really satellites anymore strictly are carrying payload for data, and the data is coming in just huge tranches, right? So it's sifting through the needle in the haystack, so to speak. But I think it's interesting that we've kind of, here at Spirit, we've kind of at the beginning of the year decided, what are we going to do differently, right? Which is what you're always doing yourself. And one of the areas that we didn't feel we were covering well was non-US new space. And it turns out that there is a lot of interest out there, especially if you're in our kind of category of module and subsystem components, for sure. There's a lot of people out there trying to figure out how to get into the US market, because obviously we launched the most, you know, we've got the most rocket manufacturers, et cetera. We're really having some great success with the European markets, you know, some South African, Australian, these kinds of things, to try to bring some of their product and maybe push the new space market, you know, quicker into launch, or, you know, into whatever their data collection is going to be. So I think you're right. There'll be a need for more rocket companies, because I think there'll just be that many more launched up there.
Yeah, I'll make a prediction that, you know, SpaceX at some point will not be launching small satellites anymore. If you look at what they're launching today, 75% is Starlink. And if you think that Starship is built to launch small satellites, then you're smoking some better stuff than I have.
You truly are a Californian if you're smoking.
Right.
Well, I know you and I are both in Arizona, so I know that our constituents here and the delegates of Arizona are doing great work to continue to bring new space and other tech here, which I'm super thrilled with. Obviously, I come out of the Valley, like you're very familiar with. So without the ecosystem, nobody wins. You got to get the ecosystem happening here. So I'm super happy with everything they're doing here locally.
Yeah, I'm very optimistic about Arizona. I sort of self-adopted in 2007 when I got married a second time, and my second wife was an executive at Raytheon. So I'd been coming to Phoenix for years and years for a company called Spectrum Astro, you know, help them grow. And they were one of the original small sat builders right there in Gilbert. honestly, I didn't care for it because it was always August when I was down there helping with proposals. But it's really grown on me, and it's one of these things I'll never leave. From a business point of view, what I like about it is, it's very live and let live as far as like a philosophy of the entire society. And the legislature seems to reflect that for the most part. They've been very helpful to us, and they gave us a test site, some city land that we can fire rockets off on. It's close to the federal prison, so we don't care if we break their eardrums, I guess. But the workforce in Arizona is what really I like, and it collects like-minded people. And I don't mean that politically. What I mean that is we like to hire doers, builders, and makers. And I don't know, somehow, living with rattlesnakes and cactus just seems to weed out the ones who like to sit around and pontificate and drink martinis all the time. Not that that's a bad thing.
Yeah, it weeds out I read a book recently, you might enjoy it. It's called the Comfort Crisis. And and basically I forget the author, I apologize, but it was so dead on, right? Like I grew up in the middle of Pennsylvania in this, heavy Amish Mennonite community where they don't have power and water, right? And or an automobile, right? There's still horse and buggy.
Wow.
And I go home and, you're dealing with aircraft and space. One day I go home and there's, there's that environment where the horse and buggy is going down the road.
Yeah.
So the problem was in this book is the creature comforts, it's killing us, right? Like
it is, yeah.
If we're not between 75 and 78 and nothing varies between that, and there's plenty of food, all these things, the book is fabulous to show how much we're becoming very sedentary.
Yeah, I was talking, so I have a second home in Utah, which is where I am right at the moment. And it's about 8,000 feet in elevation. So we got to get it ready for the snow. And I spend many, many years here in Utah, and it's home to me kind of anymore. And I was telling them, men need things to push against to feel like men. And what I meant by that was, when it snows and things break and, the harsh realities of life, if those things go away, we're just not humans anymore. We just aren't.
Yes. Yeah. In the book, there's this great example that they gave about the culture in Iceland and how that community has they have these genetic characteristics now because their life is, more demanding on them from harsh. Yeah.
It's a harsh environment.
It's a fabulous study. But anyway,
it's interesting. I'll have to read that. Thank you for the reference.
I digress. So anyway, I want to be aware of the time. Jim, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you today, and great information. Your legacy in space is just like, nobody stands too close to you there.
You're too kind. I just consider myself very fortunate that I was in the right place at the right time. So.
Good. Well, we will definitely stay in touch with you here at Spirit, and obviously we'll be here in the desert in the winter together, and we'll touch base then.
Yeah, I'll come visit you.
Sounds great. All right.
All right.
Thanks for listening with Spirit this week. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast to let us know what you want to hear about in aerospace and defense. You can find out more about Spirit's value-added services and product lines at spiritelectronics.com.